Have you guys ever thought about why digital mixers aren't really reviewed in the same way that other products are? Like, there's reviewers that are reviewing every single phone that comes out in a given year, and a lot of phones come out every year. Whereas with digital consoles, maybe like one, maybe two, digital consoles have such a long lifetime that a digital console might not be updated for 10 years like the X32 was. So why aren't they reviewed in the same way? Well, there's a couple of pretty simple reasons for that. One is that consoles are incredibly expensive. Two is that nobody is going to be watching those videos, or at least a lot less people than would be interested in watching a smartphone review. So there isn't a market for it. So there's no money in it for somebody to go buy multiple consoles and compare them. So all of the different reviews that you're going to see on YouTube of digital consoles are either from mass producers or suppliers like Guitar Center, for example, or Sweetwater, or they're from professionals who happen to own that board, and likely it is one of the only boards they own. They aren't going to have multiple that they can compare. So given this, I decided to do the closest thing I could in my power. I'm not going to go out and buy or rent a bunch of mixing consoles to test them out. I am instead going to test out the one aspect of digital mixing that is free, and that is their wireless applications. I am talking about the programs that you can use to wirelessly control. Now, today I am going to be looking exclusively at Windows programs. I will be making another video where I focus exclusively on Android programs in the future. But for now, all of the programs I will be talking about today are Windows-based programs. In the process of testing out these programs, I obviously wasn't able to use all of them in an actual live scenario because I don't have access to all the boards. I will be sure to specify which boards I have used in live use and which ones I have not. I would also like to state that the computer I used to test these was mainly my laptop, a Lenovo Yoga something, I don't know, but it has a touchscreen, so sometimes you might see my cursor jump around a little bit. That's the way OBS shows touches, so if you see something that doesn't look like it could actually happen with a trackpad, it's because it's not. It's because I'm doing it with a touchscreen. And today I'll be looking at the capabilities of a touchscreen and of a trackpad in all of these programs, because I think for a Windows program it is absolutely essential that it be usable in both ways, because you may not have access to a device with a touchscreen, or you may not have access to a good pointing tool. Today, the primary categories I will be looking at is the overall interface, and I'll give lots of information with that. The ease of use of the software without a control surface, meaning without a physical board. This is rack software. The better a software is without having to touch the board, the better it is in my opinion. I'll be talking about the menu systems. Some of these have really easy to use menu systems and some of them do not, and I think that that is a really important distinction because there are so many features on a digital board and you should be able to go through them easily. Finally, I will also be discussing any unique abilities that a given software has. If a piece of software has an ability that makes it different or allows it to do something that other softwares cannot, I will be absolutely certain to point it out by talking about Behringer X32 Edit. Now, I want to note that this program is very similar to the program used for the Midas M32, and it is also very similar to X-Air Edit for consoles that do not have any physical faders. I will be talking about all of those together because they are virtually identical. First, we need to discuss the interface, and I think the interface for X-Edit is great. I love it. I will say I am a bit biased because it is probably the first Windows-based program I used, but no matter, I think it is excellent even after testing out many other options. The first thing I really like about Xedit is it always scales properly. You wouldn't think that modern software would have this issue, but some of the softwares on this list do not scale properly up to your display size. And Xedit is fantastic. It consistently scales to the correct size of your screen, even with weird aspect ratio screens. And generally speaking, it uses the whole display to display information well. Sometimes there are blank spots, so it isn't the best on this list in terms of scaling. Sometimes it doesn't use the space in the best way I think it could, but overall it works pretty well in that regard. One way that this software differs a little bit from some of the other softwares on this list is that when you open the software, you instantly see all the controls, and there is a little plugin on the side that you can click to actually connect it to the board. Whereas other options on this list, you get a context menu and you can click on that to launch the program. This has the negative of you not always being able to tell if your board is connected, but it has a huge positive of making it a lot easier to do edits and make a scene or a program and then upload that to the board. The controls in X32 Edit are admittedly a little bit small, particularly the faders. I don't think it's very usable for touchscreen or for trackpad use, but in a pinch it will work. It's really more to be used alongside the board. I will say, however, that the fat channel controls, specifically the EQ, are large and fairly easy to use, and I like that you can see them and the faders at the same time. Unfortunately, I will say the dynamics controls, specifically compression, are a little bit more difficult to use. They're a little bit smaller than an EQ, and there's a little bit of extra space in there that I think they could have used better. The way that the faders are organized for this particular software is in layers, and you do have the ability to add custom layers, which can include anything from channels to DCAs to effects. That is a good inclusion, and I like it very much. For ease of use without a control surface, this is not the easiest one on the list. You could definitely do it, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a very, very large touchscreen. The menu system, a little bit confusing, but you can get used to it. Stuff is a little on the scattered side, but for the most part it makes sense. And if you have a general understanding of X32 menus, it's not that different. And I find that there's things that are a lot easier to do in the software than they are to do on the board. So that's a big plus. Specifically, routing is what I'm talking about. Finally, unique abilities, and the main one here is clearly the ability to make a program or make a scene and then upload it to the console. This is great if you don't have access to a board and you are going to have access to a board later. You have to make a program ahead of time so that you don't have to do that when you get to an event. It can save you a lot of time, and it's a good feature to have. The overall pros and cons of X32 Edit are as follows. It's easy to see all of your fat channel controls, and with custom layers, you can, for the most part, see any faders that you need to see. It has a lot of options, and you can see just about any feature that the board would be capable of producing normally. The scaling of the software is good. It's not the best, but it's better than many other options on this list. And the ability to recall scenes from the computer is excellent. There are, unfortunately, a few cons to this software, though. There are a few things about this software that I do not like. Primarily, they are that the program doesn't actually install on the computer. It's just sort of an application that you download and you can double click on it and it opens, but it doesn't really have an installation process. This could be considered a huge advantage because it makes it easier to put it on your computer. But something about having it not installed has always made me uncomfortable. Not a real con, that's like a proto-con. An actual con is that it's not very mouse friendly. It works, but it could work a whole lot better than it does. I also think that overall X32 Edit could do a little bit better job of using its space effectively, and I would like more options to resize certain things to be able to see one thing or another in a larger, more easy to use fashion. Next, I'm going to talk about Presonus Universal Control. This one is going to be a little bit different from the others because it is the only one that I use on a regular basis. And that is because I have a Presonus RML 16AI mixer. So right here, I actually have a touchscreen laptop that is always running Presonus Universal Control. Now, I also will say I am in no way biased to Presonus Universal Control because it has some issues which I will get into. First, to talk about the interface, I gotta say the scaling is the best of all the programs that I have used so far. I have a ton of different weird screen aspect ratios, like, I got the 3x4, I got the 16x10, the 16x9, I've got vertical screens, and it has scaled perfectly on every single screen I have run it on, which is awesome, because a lot of these programs don't scale correctly. So that is a huge win for Presonus there, scaling perfectly every single time. This will become a little bit of an issue later when I do my Android video, because it becomes a little bit of a problem with smaller screens. But any screen over 10 inches, you're totally fine. It's going to look great. The faders on this software are also really big. You can use them very easily with your finger on a touchscreen or with a mouse or trackpad. I will say I think that the fat channel controls are a little on the small side, but I must also say that they are relatively easy to use, and I like being able to see both the fat channel controls and the faders at the same time. What I do have some mixed feelings about, though, is scrolling. Universal Control does not have layering, but rather it has scrolling. The advantage to having scrolling is that you don't have to click through layers. The disadvantage is it doesn't really allow for custom layers. Despite not being able to make real custom layers, Presonus makes up for this with its DCA compatibility, where you can pretty much make a DCA out of anything, and you can make pretty much as many as you want and order them however you want and put them wherever you want. So with DCAs, it's not quite as good as a custom layer, but obviously DCAs are nice to have, and you can kind of do whatever you want with them. So it's a pretty good inclusion of that, I guess. Ease of use without a control surface. This is obviously one of the best on the list because it was originally developed for boards that don't have faders. Obviously now it's compatible with different kinds of boards like the Series 3 mixers, but it works pretty well. I will say again, I don't think it's the best one on this list, but it does work pretty well without an actual physical console. The menu system is where there gets to be a little bit of an issue with Presonus Universal Control. And what I mean specifically by this is the fact that the menus suck. They are all over the place. Now, I totally understand them because I've used it, but compared to some of these other softwares, it took me longer to figure out where everything was, because everything's pretty scattered and not so well labeled, and some labels are the same, but they do different things, and sometimes the same button does a different thing when you're on a different page, even though the label is not, I don't know. It's really confusing software to use, but once you do understand it, it's pretty easy to use, and I haven't had much of an issue getting into that learning curve. Finally, I would like to talk about the unique abilities with this, and I'd like to talk about Smart. Now, this is more of a board feature. I know I'm supposed to be talking about the software, but it's worth mentioning that the RML console is actually able to do something called Smart, which is It's an acronym for something, I don't know. But it's basically a house processing type of stuff. So you can plug an RTA mic into this and it will do all that house processing for you. But you have to have it connected to FireWire to do that. And if you want RTA, like actual RTA, to figure out, how to EQ stuff, now you got to have FireWire. So then that brings me to a question, which is, who did Presonus think was going to buy this? Because to get full functionality out of the control surface software, you have to have a touchscreen device that has FireWire. That doesn't exist. Apple does not make a touchscreen device, Apple does not make a touchscreen device with FireWire, and never has or never will. Nor do they have a touchscreen device with something that can be converted to FireWire, not Thunderbolt 2, not Thunderbolt 3. No, doesn't exist. And let's say you have an all-in-one with a touchscreen. Okay, well, it's not going to have FireWire. It's not going to have a card slot of any kind, so you can't put a FireWire card in it, and you can't adapt it. So that's not going to work. The only option, I literally can't think of one. No, you know what you'd have to do? It would have to be a full-size desktop PC with a touchscreen display plugged into it and a FireWire card. That would be literally the only way to get the full capability out of this system. But rant aside, if you don't need to have RTA, this will work perfectly on any device with Wi-Fi. So that's not too big of an issue. Just a big complaint for me and a big annoyance of the RML series console. So now for the pros and cons of this software. The pros are that the scaling is fantastic, by far the best on this entire list. It scales to any display size or aspect ratio. Another pro is just how well this software works without a physical control surface. You don't need one. You could totally use this with just a touchscreen, and it will work very well. All the controls are pretty easy to touch, and they're pretty easy to use with the mouse as well. So you won't be disappointed in that regard. On the cons side, it's going to be those menus. Those menus are a pain in the butt. You will definitely cry. You will shed tears trying to figure out where something is. And then, of course, you'll find that it doesn't actually work, like the MIDI ports on the back of the RML-16 that don't do anything. So now we are going to move on to the Yamaha Tf Editor. Now, I know that TF series consoles are generally considered to be a little bit higher end than something like the Presonus or the X32, but the software does not match that standard. I think the software is poor. Poor is the word I'm going to use. Let's talk about the interface. It doesn't scale right, ever. It never scaled right once for me. Is it by design? Probably. Is it crap? Yep. Even when it does scale somewhat correctly, everything is minuscule, right? You can see all 32 channels, which is fantastic, but God forbid you want to actually touch one of them, it's not going to happen. It's literally not going to happen. And as a bonus, instead of having a unique interface, the screen just copies what's on the screen on the TF console, which is great if you know everything about your TF console. But guess what? That tiny little screen on the TF console is set up in the way it is because it's a tiny screen. But your laptop isn't a tiny screen. It's way bigger. So I should be able to have more options available to me. And I gotta say, the screen setup is terrible. Like, why do I need to see multiple channels on one screen on the board itself? Right? If I'm on the board itself, I have faders for that. Right? I have select buttons. So, the ability to adjust the gain, I have to go into a menu. I shouldn't have to go into a menu to adjust channel gain. What a pain in the butt. Ease of use without control surface, useless. You have to be at that mixer, right? Or you have to get an iPad or something. Won't work on Windows. Useless. I will say, a little bit of a positive, the menu system could be worse. It's not the best on this list, not the worst. Solid middle of the pack. And I'm going to give it one unique ability, which isn't actually that unique, but I will say the access to headphone controls like delay is really straightforward and it's really easy to get to. And I think it's something that's kind of like left to the side. I like being able to get it so easily. The pros are that it has some options that the other boards don't have, and it does have the ability to save and then upload to board. That's great. The cons is that it sucks. The scaling is trash, you can't see anything, it's unusable with a touch screen, and the actual TF screen is also useless and poorly engineered. Now I get to talk to you about the Yamaha QL Editor. Now, whether you believe the TF consoles are professional, like really high-end consoles or not, it's debatable. I would say most think they're pretty high-end compared to other stuff in that price range. The QL is without a doubt, though, an actual professional board. So it pains me to say that it has terrible software. Absolute garbage. The interface only has one scaling option, and you are able to zoom, but you're just zooming in on that like picture, so the resolution doesn't change, so it's like you're zooming in on an ultra-low resolution picture. So it looks terrible, and at the point where you can actually zoom in further enough to see something, you can't even see it anymore because it's so pixelated, so you could never see it. So it's useless. Everything ends up in separate windows, which hover over each other in weird ways. So if you have like 5 27-inch giant displays and you can actually see all this information all at once in these different windows, then maybe it would be useful for you. But God forbid you want to actually touch the freaking screen to make an adjustment, is not going to happen unless you have the tiniest little fingers in existence and the biggest freaking display on God's green earth. So I'm not even going to bother talking about those other categories because it's just useless. Menu system, obviously it's confusing as crap and half the stuff you can't actually edit from the software. Ease of use without a board or actually touching the board, obviously completely worthless. Again, you'd have to be a complete idiot to do that. And unique abilities, it is unique in that it sucks balls. So pros are none. They don't exist. There are no pros to this software. And the cons are that it sucks and it's completely unusable without a physical touch surface in front of you. And it overall makes me very angry, and it doesn't fill up your screen correctly, and it's hard to use, and it doesn't look right. So it's overall garbage software. Now, after that difficulty, and after the horrifying experience that is the Yamaha Tf Editor, I get to bask in the glory of the Allen & Heath Sq Mix Pad. Oh my god, this software is so much better than most of the other options on this list. You can actually see all the faders. They're super easy to see, they're so big and you can easily use them, and you can change their size. You can make them bigger or smaller. So if you want, you can see more EQ and no faders, or you can see small EQ, small faders, or you can see big faders and no EQ. This is the only software on the list that does this, and for that reason, I'm already calling it the best. That is an awesome feature. And you can see as much or as little information as you choose to see. It's scaled correctly every time. What? It fills up the whole screen? Yeah, it fills up the whole screen because it's not garbage software like Yamaha Tf Editor. Also, obviously, because it's great, custom layers are available. So you can set up any order of channels or DCAs or whatever the heck you want in any order you want. Obviously. It also has the clear best fat channel controls. You have big EQ and big compression that are easy to use and provide features that none of the softwares on this list provide. Obviously, because of all these other features, it's super easy to use without a control surface. You really don't need a control surface, but could be nice to have. The menu system, also really great. Nothing is hidden. Everything is well labeled. And I must say, I think the I/O section is a little bit confusing, but everything else about the menu system on SQ Mix Pad is very simple. I have never used an Allen & Heath SQ mixer, but now I think I want to buy one. The pros associated with this software are that the faders are huge and easy to use, and you can adjust their size, along with the size of the fat channel controls, which are also huge and easy to use, even when they're shrunk down so you can still see the faders. Also, the menus are fantastic. As I said, everything makes sense and everything is well labeled. The only con I can realistically think of for SQ Mix Pad is that it's probably not going to use your screen real estate really effectively on a very large display. This is really meant for smaller screens, and I think it'd work best on sub 15-inch laptop. Like a big all-in-one computer isn't going to run this software very well, in my opinion. Next, we're talking about Mixing Station, which is very unique compared to the other software on this list, and that is because it isn't made by a manufacturer. It's made by just a developer who happens to have an interest in good mixing software. I don't know, but it supports Behringer, Midas, Allen & Heath, and Soundcraft consoles, and it's pretty good. I didn't even know there was a Windows version of this until I made this video. I've always used the Android version, but finding out about the Windows version, I'm pretty impressed with it, so let's talk about it. It's a good thing that the interface is the same on all devices, so no matter what type of device you're going to be using for Mixing Station, it is going to give you the same experience. This can be a little bit of a negative because it's really designed for tablets, not big computers, but obviously there's those giant faders and those giant EQ controls, so you can see everything super well. It doesn't scale the best, but it fits the screen perfectly, and you can control everything perfectly with just a touchscreen. I don't like that it doesn't show the faders and the fat channel controls at the same time, but I will say it makes using each one independently of each other a little bit easier. The EQ is just so big. It's so easy to see and make sure that you get that exact pinpoint. You know, you get everything right down to the slightest little bit. It's super easy with Mixing Station. The menu systems in Mixing Station are also very simple and well laid out, although there are some features of the menu system that are blocked unless you pay for it, which is unfortunate. For unique features, obviously the biggest feature is the compatibility with so many boards, and some of these boards don't have good software, like Soundcraft, which I will be getting to in a moment. I also like the inclusion of a mute enable switch, which is a button that allows you to mute stuff. Sometimes you don't want to mute stuff, and if you accidentally hit the mute button, it could be disastrous for your mix, so having that lockout button is useful. The pros of Mixing Station are that it is large and easy to use with a touchscreen, and you have full control over all of your parameters in a full window that is really easy to see. The only cons I can really think of are that it's not really very large screen friendly. It really caters more towards smaller screens, and I guess I don't like that you have to pay for a license. It's kind of annoying, and it's because you don't have to buy any hardware from this guy because this guy just made the software. He doesn't own the console. So, you know, pretty good software. Pretty good. Now we move on to Soundcraft. I wanted to talk about Soundcraft SI series mixers, but none of them really have a legitimate software. They've got like an offline editor, but it doesn't really seem to have like online connectivity abilities. I'm not 100% sure. I checked it out, kind of sucked. So what I'll really dive a little bit more into is the Soundcraft UI software, which is their boards that don't actually have physical faders. And this one's a little weird because it's web-based. I don't know if the demo version I tried out was really like the PC version or not, but it was really more tablet oriented, and it was okay. I have actually used this one live before, and I didn't have any complaints about it at the time, and still I don't have many, but the interface is pretty good. The faders are, generally speaking, pretty large and easy to move. It's pretty easy to see your levels, and I like that it shows you both your input and output level. As you raise up the fader, you'll see the colors kind of change as the input and output cross over each other. I like that you can use two-finger scrolling on a trackpad to raise and lower faders. I don't think any of the other softwares on this list were capable of that. And I obviously don't like that you can't see your faders and your controls, fat channel controls, at the same time. But as is with the other programs on this list that are like that, you are able to see things a little better, which is nice for touchscreen control. Because this software is intended for a device that has no physical controls, it works pretty well without a control surface. It's pretty easy to use on any size device. And it works pretty well in all of those regards. As for menu system and unique abilities, all pretty average, really run-of-the-mill. It's not like super complicated to find stuff, and it's not real simple. It's right in the middle. You'll figure it out, but there's some stuff that's in weird places, but for the most part, you'll be able to find stuff when you need it. So the pros are that it's web-based, so you never have to install anything, but that could kind of be a con too, because it's not super reliable and uses a little more CPU. It's very touch-friendly, very easy to use all the fat channel controls and all the big faders. Unfortunately, I'll say it's not very large screen friendly. That's definitely a con. It doesn't show the faders and fat channel at the same time, and you can have a lot of problems with web-based stuff, so I'm not 100% sure if I could recommend this particular software. Finally, I would like to talk about Mackie Master Fader, which is a software I was not aware of until I did this video. And I'm actually kind of surprised by how polished it is for Mackie, being a company that I actually wasn't aware made digital mixers. During the installation, it tried to install Apple's Bonjour service on my computer, which is really annoying because that is a service that will just run on your computer all day long and suck CPU. Not sure if it actually needs it to operate, but I canceled that. I really didn't want to deal with Apple Bonjour, so I was pretty pissed off about that. But it still allowed me to install Mackie Master Fader without Bonjour, so that was a plus, I guess. As for the interface itself, the faders are large, they fill up the whole screen. Same thing as all the other programs that are like this. Obviously, there's the negative that you can't see your faders and your fat channel controls at the same time, but they're larger and easier to see. It uses scrolling instead of layers like the Presonus. Take it or leave it, works fine, but I think it does have a little bit more custom layer capabilities. They're just a little different from regular layer capabilities. It just changes the order that you scroll through. I will say my biggest complaint about the interface is probably has to do with send controls. They are all over the place and they make absolutely no sense. You will never be able to figure out what send goes to what. I couldn't figure it out. It didn't make any sense to me. The biggest issue, in my opinion, with Mackie Master Fader is really its menu systems. I will say that they could be a little bit more confusing. Like, they're not the most confusing menus in existence, but they sure are a little bit confusing because nothing is labeled correctly at all. Like the EQ, it's not labeled EQ. It's like a picture that doesn't look like EQ. And the dynamics are not labeled dynamics. They are like a picture that doesn't look like dynamics. And everything in the software is like this, just poorly labeled. So that's like a really easy thing they could fix. And I hope that someday they do. So the overall pros of Mackie Master Fader are primarily that it's really simple to use on a touchscreen, and it's actually probably the smoothest on this list. It really felt smooth, like buttery, 60 frames per second, buttery smooth, a lot quicker than some of the other softwares I tested. On the negative side, though, and tried to install Apple Bonjour on my computer, and that is a big frickin' no-no. Not really complaint about the software, but complaint about Mackie. Don't install bloatware on my computer. I don't like it. Also, the program froze on me while I was using it. Never crashed, but it did freeze, and that was annoying. And of course, biggest con of all, crap labeling. Fix your labels, Mackie. Fix them. So that is all the mixers. I've gone through all of them. And here are my general conclusions. I am going to say SQ Mix Pad is the clear winner of all of these for touchscreen use, right? But if you're using one of these alongside your board and you don't intend on touching it, it's really just for visual info, I would say X32 Edit is really the best because you can see a lot of info at once. But all of them are good in different ways, except for QL Editor, kind of TF Editor, kind of crap. And some of the boards I looked at that just didn't really have good editors at all or anything. That's a big no-no. But really, the clear winner here is SQ Mix Pad. That doesn't mean you should go out and buy an SQ mixer. There are obviously a lot of good reasons to buy any of the other boards that are associated with these softwares. They're all good for different reasons. But I'm just telling you right up, straight up, that SQ Mix Pad was the best one I tested today. So if that's really important to you, then go buy an SQ mixer or one of the higher end mixers that uses similar software. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel so that you can see my next video where I'll be talking about the Android apps. Until next time, have a good one, guys. Peace out.